In the last tutorial, we introduced the concept of the alignment index as a way of trading off different alignment criteria. In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at how you actually calculate the alignment index. I have to say this is one of the most probably complicated parts of alignment, and it takes a little thought just to get your head around it. But once you do understand it, it's a powerful technique and something that really simplifies the whole alignment process once you get it right. Now, AlignMix will do this automatically, but nevertheless it's good to know the theory underpinning the alignment index. So let's make a start. So just to recap, the alignment index is a weighted measure of multiple alignment factors. So you'd calculate an alignment index for a zip code or a postcode made up of the factors for that zip code or postcode, and then you'd sum them to the territory level. That's how it works. Typically scale it so the average territory has 1,000 index units. And as we've said in the previous tutorial, it enables us to trade off one factor for another. Now here's an example that we're going to use, and we're going to take this through and calculate the alignment index for each of the zip codes in the example we have. We're going to say that we want to calculate an index based on 70% calls, 20% affluence, and 10% demographics. Now in your case it might be different, but these are the examples weights that we're going to use. If we look at the statistics for these factors at a national level, we're given a weight of 70% on calls, and there are actually 295,930 calls planned nationally. Affluence, we're given a weight of 20%, and there's 3.6 trillion allocated across the US. Demographics, 10% weight, and the national total is just under 30 million. And this alignment index is going to be based on a team size of 220 reps. Now that's an important aspect because the index changes depending upon the number of reps. So if you're going to do an index for 220, that will be different than an index for 300. When I say different, the index conversion factors will be different, and you'll see that the team size plays a part in the whole calculation. So what we need to do for each of the factors is we need to create we need to find out what we have to multiply each factor by to convert it into its index equivalent. So if we have 100 calls in a zip code, what are those calls worth in terms of index units? So let's use calls as an example, and I'm going to first of all take you through sort of the logic, and then we're going to generalize this into a formula. So the total calls for all territories in our example was 295,930. So that means the average calls per territory will be 295,930 divided by 220, in other words the team size. And that comes to 1,345 calls per territory. And this is where we need to make the logical jump. So this means that 1,345 calls is equivalent to 70% of that 1,000 index average. So the average territory has 1,345 calls, and the average territory has 1,000 index units, and we're using 70% for the calls. So 1,345 calls is equivalent to 700 index units. Therefore, one call, rearranging the formula, is equal to 700 divided by 1,345, in other words 0.52. So therefore the index conversion factor for calls is 0.52. So in the example I gave, if a zip code had 100 calls associated with it, then that would be the equivalent to 100 times 0.52 52 index units. So hopefully that gives you a glimpse of the theory, and this is probably something that you should go over a couple of times just to make sure that you get it conceptually. We can of course generalize this into a formula for the factor, and the index factor or the multiplication factor is 1,000, the average that we want to make, times the percentage weight times the territory count, all divided by the national total. And in our particular example, index factor was 1,000 times 70% times territory count 220 divided by 295,930, and that came out to 0.52. So 100 calls would be the equivalent to 0.52 times 100, 52 index units. Now we can generalize this for multiple factors. So if we were calculating the actual index for a particular zip, this is the formula based on our example. It's 1,000, the average number, times the team size, and then you can see in brackets we've got the weight times the calls divided by the total for each factor. So it's maybe worth pausing the video at this point and just making sure that you are happy with this, and then we're going to go on and actually do the calculation in Excel. Here's some example data. So on the left hand side in the A column we have the zips, and then we've got the account numbers in each zip code. So there's 3 A accounts in zip code 77840, 1B, 1C and 4 Ds. So we can have a look at this. We've now calculated the number of calls that we'd like to make in this zip code. That's based on the frequency against each of the accounts, so it turns out to be 106. We've got the affluence for this zip code, and that sort of data can be acquired, and the demographics, that's probably the population of the specific demographic that you're targeting. So I'd like to create the index for each of these. To do that, I'm going to actually create the totals. So I'm going to have a totals column here, equals sum so I've got the sum there, and I've got the sum of the other 2 variables, and now I'm going to call it index 220. That's the general convention that I use. I use index and then the team size because that's so important. So let's use the formula that we had. So it's equals 1,000 times 220 times, and then there was going to be a 70% factor on calls. So I'm going to multiply this by the calls number, divide it by the total, press F4 to fix the total, and then I'm going to add 0.2, that was the 20% based on the affluence measure, and I'm going to divide that by total affluence, press F4 to fix that, plus the demographics times, that was 0.1, divided by the total for the demographics number. Again, F4 fixes it. I'm going to press enter, and you can see for this particular zip code it's 75 index units. Another way of thinking about it, this is worth 7.5% of an average territory. So if I double click on the little icon at the bottom right, that'll copy it right down to the bottom. Now I'm going to sum this for all territories. Now this is an important check that you always make. If you've done the index calculation correctly, then the sum of all indexes nationally will be the team size times 1,000. We were doing 220 reps, and obviously times 1,000 is 220,000, which is exactly what we have here. So there we have it. there we've calculated an index based on 70% calls, 20% affluence, 10% demographics for our alignment. Now when we import this in, we can then use that as the basis of creating our new alignment and also auditing our old alignment. Now I realize that this is, as I said, probably one of the most tricky conceptual things that you need to get your head around when you're using an alignment package. Alignmix will do this automatically, but it is still important to know the underlying theory. So maybe go over this video a couple of times until you're absolutely crystal clear about the concepts and the theory. So I hope you found this useful, and look for some other tutorials on alignmix.com. Thank you. Bye-bye.